Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts on Roseanna by Sjöwall Wahlöö, the husband and wife team who crafted the best police procedural series that I've ever encountered. Roseanna kicks off the Martin Beck detective books. And these are meticulously plotted. They are fantastic crime novels. They illuminate so many different aspects of a society. And that's really what sets these books apart and above the other police procedurals that I've encountered, in my reading lifetime. This is the third time I've read Roseanna, and there are ways in which Sjöwall Wahlöö allow a reader to become immersed in mid-1960s Sweden. We learn so much about culture, about society, about rural life versus urban life, and the different ways that a person inhabits and lives in this world. We learn about the ways in which a society lets someone down and that person turns violent, or that the society lets that person down and that person is a victim of the violence. And we see that. We get to meet characters who feel incredibly real. There's such a level of detail and care. You can almost like smell the clothing in the rooms in these books. And Roseanna's not even my favorite, excuse me, among this series. It gives us, it lays this groundwork for a world that springs to life across the subsequent novels. And they were written in the middle 1960s through the mid 1970s. Sjöwall and Wahlöö worked together to craft the characters, to craft the plots, to craft the setting. There's this sense of two perspectives constantly coming together to really give us binocular vision and a depth to the world here. But we're introduced in a way that allows mystery to start. Because when we open up, we don't open with a chapter introducing us to Beck, the detective who's going to solve this case. We're introduced with this setting where a body's found. We're not told who it is. They don't know this person's name. They assume she's Swedish. Eventually, they'll call Beck in. He arrives with his team, and we get to meet Beck. We get to feel him. He's perpetually under the weather, literally and figuratively. He's melancholy. Everything seems to upset his stomach. He's aging, but he's young enough to still be vigorous in ways. But we meet his team. There's the young detective who's sort of like trying to learn the ropes and make a name for himself. There's older detectives who have different skill sets, and Beck recognizes this. He's not just a detective. He's also in a sense managing his team at times, and getting them to work together. We see how he's unhappy in his marriage, unhappy in different relationships, and that will, those will change and transpire across the course of the novels. But I did want to read just a few passages. I don't want to go into the plot details because if you've never read this series, you really are in for a treat. But I did want to read a couple passages just to give a sense of what it can sound like, because this is about the business of trying to grapple with a crime. And Sjöwall very much have this perspective of the crime is, in a sense, if you can solve the problem of society, you solve the crime. The crime is endemic to a society in some ways. So diagnose the problem there and approach it from that perspective. So I want to read just a little bit. Beck is told, use the office farthest down the corridor. The room was larger than Alberg's and had windows on two walls. It was furnished with 2 desks, 5 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a typewriter table with a disgracefully old Remington. Martin Beck sat down, placed his cigarettes and matches on the table, put down the green folder, and began to go through the reports. They didn't tell him much more than he had already learned from Alberg. An hour and a half later, he ran out of cigarettes. He placed a few telephone calls without result and had talked to the commissioner and to Superintendent Larsson, who seemed tired and pressed. Just as he had crumpled the empty cigarette package, Kohlberg called. 10 minutes later, they met at the hotel. God, you look dismal, Kohlberg said. Do you want a cigarette? No, thank you. What have you been doing? I've been talking to a guy from the Motala Times, a local editor in Borensberg. He thought he had found something. A girl from Linköping was to have started a new job in Borensberg 10 days ago, but she never arrived. She was thought to have left Linköping the day before, and since then, no one has heard from her. No one thought to report her missing since she was generally unreliable. This newspaperman knew her employer and started making his own inquiries, but never bothered to get a description of her. But I did, and it isn't the same girl. It took me the entire day. He leaned back in his chair and picked his teeth with a match. What do we do now? And they kind of talk through what are they going to do? There's no leads. How are they going to solve this? And Beck goes back to his room. The weather had cleared. White puffs of cloud moved across the sky. The afternoon sun shone into the room. He thought about the girl who had been pulled out of Bourne's bottom mud. When he closed his eyes, he saw her before him as she looked in the picture, naked and abandoned, with narrow shoulders, and her dark hair in a coil across her throat. Who was she? What had she thought? How had she lived? Whom had she met? She was young, and he was sure that she had been pretty. She must have had someone who loved her, someone close to her who was wondering what had happened to her. She must have had friends, colleagues, parents, maybe sisters and brothers. No human being, particularly a young, attractive woman, is so alone that there is no one to miss her when she disappears. Martin Beck thought about this for a long time. No one had inquired about her. He felt sorry for the girl whom no one missed. He couldn't understand why. Maybe she had said that she was going away. If so, it might be a long time before someone wondered where she was. The question was, how long? And we learned that this book takes place over the course of months, plural. It's a long time to solve this crime. It's not captured with some dramatic confession or a tiny clue that they find or this one brilliant piece of detective work. It's drudgery. It's actual work to solve this crime. It's they don't know what this person looks like, so they get all the people who are on this little cruise ship, because it seems that the body had been dumped off of a cruise ship. All the people who were there, they just start sending out letters. Hey, are there any photos? Are there any negatives? Can we identify this person? See if there was anyone talking to her. They go and investigate the boat itself, and they find this room. The door to the cabin opened directly toward the stern. The cabin was small, no more than 12 feet long, and lacked ventilation. The backrest on the bed could be lifted up and turned into a top bunk. There was also a wash basin with a mahogany cover, which, when down, provided some counter space. On the bulkhead over the wash basin was a mirror with a holder for a glass and toilet articles. The cabin floor was covered with a rug, which was tacked down, and there was a place for luggage under the bunk. At the end of the bed, there was an empty space with some clothing hooks on the bulkhead. There was hardly room for 3 people in there, which was soon obvious to the man from the shipping office. He went out and sat on a box containing life jackets and looked anxiously at his soaking wet shoes, which dangled a good bit above the deck. Martin Beck and Alberg examined the small cabin. They hadn't hoped to find any traces of Roseanna, since they knew that the cabin had been cleaned a good number of times since she had occupied it. Alberg lay down on the bed carefully and stated that there was hardly enough room in it for an adult person. And they're constantly having to do things. They're not just sitting and ruminating on the mysteries or cleverly, grasping the solution. They're constantly having to work, to make calls, to make long-distance calls in the 1960s to the U.S., because it turns out that's where the woman Roseanna was from. And we gradually start to grasp aspects about these characters who are searching, who have this dedicated sense of purpose, and they think about with regret about various crimes that haven't been solved or have been solved, and they know that the only way this gets solved is if they keep trudging forward. They keep finding the next step and taking that. The ending to the book is incredibly dynamic. It has this whole shift in tone, this entire shift in sort of the pace and the register. I don't want to spoil it, but it isn't just this plotting book, but we really do get into this day-to-day breathing sense of these detectives. And from there, the series just takes off in all sorts of really fascinating ways. A couple of ones to highlight. The second detective book is The Man Who Went Up in Smoke, about a man who just disappears. And from here, we would end up with Beck going to Budapest, into Hungary, behind the Iron Curtain, really, to see what he can find there. A subsequent novel, The Laughing Policeman, is, I think, maybe the best in the series. It's really, really quite incredible. This is, I think, one of the best police procedurals ever written. And then Murder at the Savoy has a murder that actually prefigures the famous assassination of Olof Palme in Sweden by a decade, and brings the violence into a totally different arena from where it has been across some of the earlier books. The books are not repetitive in any way, and they really do illuminate just these tiny little facets and corners of Swedish society that it's fantastic. It's like Jane Austen's world, except they're crime novels. The realism is just so layered and textured. A book that provides a very different perspective, one from the perspective of a woman, and an indictment of societies that just allow femicide to occur all the time, is Selva Almada's Dead Girls, which is one of the finest books of the 21st century, in my opinion. And do not miss reading this book, whether you're a fan of crime fiction or not. This is a masterpiece. So now, a couple of other police procedurals that I'm a huge fan of. Derek Raymond's factory novels or black novels with this unnamed investigator who just basically is investigating the deaths of the poorest people, people who are sometimes unnamed, and he himself never really has a name. These are some of the best sort of grittiest, grimiest crime fiction novels that one can encounter. The first one is He Died with His Eyes Open. These are incredibly sad books, because any loss of life is sad, but there's a way in which Raymond empathizes with the humanity of his victims, and his detective is almost trying to restore that in some way by solving these crimes. So these are absolute, not to be missed. Certainly there are all sorts of Scandinavian writers who follow in the footsteps of the Martin Beck series. Henning Mankell's Kurt Wallander series so almost picks up about a decade after the Martin Beck series ends. We get the Wallander series, and Faceless Killers kicks that off. And again, we have a very socially conscious detective. They're police procedurals. Wallander is constantly, he is changing, he's aging, his relationship to his daughter and to his father. Those change throughout the course of the series. And there's a real sort of social justice perspective within these books. Additionally, Nesbo, I really like the Snowman and the Leopard. Nemesis is really good. The Devil's Star is okay. The very first Harry Hole book, the Redbreast, I think that's what it's called, is pretty weak in my opinion. But the subsequent series is really very, very strong. I'm a big fan of this. My wife loves these books. She was actually the first one of us to read them. Another police procedural series that I cannot recommend highly enough would be the Navajo Tribal Police series that Tony Hillerman wrote in the southwestern U.S. And so there are the Joe Leaphorn mysteries, Dance Hall of the Dead, Listening Woman. These are two of the best that I've ever read. This is probably the series that comes closest to the Beck detective books. Certainly the whole idea of a detective piecing together the mystery using photographs suggests that Stieg Larsson had read these books when he started The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, another strong series. Arthur Lyons with his Jacob Ash detective books. These are not police procedurals, but they involve a private detective who operates almost like an insurance agent. He's constantly just like looking up records and having to go. He's not smart talking his way through or bruising his way through. He really is getting into the documents to trace things. And his books really do illuminate this interesting aspect of sort of like 1970s and early 1980s in the U.S. with The Dead Are Discreet, All of God's Children, Hard Trade, Castles Burning. He's a great writer. Dorothy Hughes with In a Lonely Place gives us that perspective of women sort of pushing back against the violence of men. And a book that's not quite a police procedural and sort of parodies it, but is one of the best, is certainly The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco with a medieval monk, Sir William of Baskerville, sort of a Sherlock Holmes set during the Middle Ages. This is a masterpiece as well. So let me know if you have specifically read the Beck series, if you have a favorite. And I look forward to hearing from her. I hope everyone's well. Thank you.